History Through Fiction, the podcast. I'm your host, Colin Mustful, and today I'm delighted to be joined by Billie Hanson-Dupree, author of the novel Still Kicking. Billie, welcome.
Thank you.
Well, we're recording this in January. The book has not come out yet. So I'm just going to admit out front that I don't know much about your book, which I assume a lot of our listeners also will be new to this title. So could you start by just telling us a little bit about the setting, the characters, and the plot behind your novel, Still Kicking?
Well, the book was inspired by my dad, who was a veteran from World War II. And my aunt told me that when he came back from the war, he was uh, shell-shocked, they called it at that time. So it was inspired by that. It started to be about him, and then all these other characters just popped in. There is him, Bill, the main character. There is also a couple of women in there. One of them, Darlene, has been through a lot, and so they find a camaraderie, I guess you would call it, because they could talk about the struggles that they had had. He talked about his struggles during the war and coming back and having these spells that he didn't know what to do with. He felt he was so changed by what had happened. And she talks about her struggles with, she's a dark-skinned Black woman, and sometimes it's hard for her. Sometimes people make fun of her because of the color of her skin. And also, she had been in an abusive relationship. And they talk, not, there's no romantic interest at first. Bill is more interested in another another woman in the book, and she's younger and she doesn't understand that he's having these blackouts. She sees him in the cotton field having one, and she kind of pulls back. So it follows the three of them through the story. Its setting is in the Central Valley of California, um, just after World War II.
And is that where you grew up as well?
Yes, it is. In fact, the setting is Merced, California, where I was born. I stayed there until I was in high school age. I lived there. And I go back frequently to visit. I have relatives there. We have our family reunion there every year. So yes, that's my background, California. I'm a Cali girl.
So it sounds like you started with some family history and it developed into this narrative. Can you talk about that transition from your real family history to making this into historical fiction narrative that kind of conveys not just some of the history that you experienced, but the history of California, of the country at that time, and where the time and place where this takes place?
Well, as I said, it was inspired by my dad, but my dad never talked about the war. So I never knew any that he came back and that he was broken. Of course, a lot of people find that veterans, when they come back, their behavior has changed, and you don't know what it is. But it was the war. But I didn't know that it was related to the war. I just thought that's just how he was in terms of alcoholism and things. But it was only inspired by that. The rest is really fiction. It just started out with him waking, the part that I read, to these nightmares. But the rest is totally fiction. These other people just showed up. I didn't expect them. Isella and Darlene, I didn't know they were going to be in the book, but they came up. And so that's that's how it all came together for me.
Well, talk more about that because I talk to a lot of writers on the podcast, and they often tell me about hearing voices in their head and their characters talking to them. So, was there a moment of inspiration where these characters showed up for you? And when did you know that they were telling you they were in the story?
Well, it's kind of funny because what happened is I wrote the first chapter. Okay, and it was just about Bill. And I thought the book was going to be just about Bill. And then a romantic interest showed up for Bill. And it wasn't in a dream or anything. It was just, well, I'm going to write about her from her viewpoint. So it's actually from several viewpoints, from Bill's and from Izetta's and from Darlene's viewpoint. And also Randy, another character in the story. So they just kind of came to me. I'm one of those, what do they call, pantsers, you know. It's not, I didn't plot it all out and all that. It just took me where it wanted me to go.
You have quite a few writing credentials. Is this your first historical fiction novel?
Yes, it is. It's actually it's my first the first novel. I've written a couple of more. This is the first one that's being published. Let me put it that way. And I enjoyed it immensely. But now, you know, I'm starting to look at short stories and things like that because a novel, as you know, takes a long time. And the revision and all that. Of course, for me, one of the favorite parts is the revising, is the refining, is the editing, because you get the story out and then you can improve upon the story. But getting the story out is for me the harder part of the whole process.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you learned. One of my favorite aspects of historical fiction is learning about elements of history, people in history that I never knew anything about. I'm assuming that as you did your research, a few things kind of stuck out to you that were new. So, what are some of the things that you learned and that readers will learn from this novel?
Well, I learned a lot more about World War II that I didn't know. I learned a lot about African Americans in World War II, especially. My father was in, well, most of the African Americans were in the service aspect. You know, they were cooks, they were truck drivers, they were mechanics, things like that. And that's what my father, he was in the Red Ball Express, which were truck drivers who brought supplies to the front lines, essentially. And so I learned about that. I learned that there weren't, until the end of the war, there weren't that many African Americans in combat. I learned that the armed forces, well, I knew that they were segregated. I just didn't know, you know, how segregated they were. Um, a lot of things that happened in terms of African Americans, I learned about that as I was doing the research. And also that they had, I think there's a movie, in fact, there is a movie about I'm trying to think of the name of them. They flew um, plane, I think they were from Tuskegee University, Red Tail or, no, it was something else.
I'm sure I've seen it, but I can't think of it off the top of my head either.
But anyway, so I learned, you know, I knew about that, but I didn't know how they did not really until toward the end when they needed more bodies, they needed more people on the front line, more infantry, that they started semi-integrating. It still was segregated, but in terms of fighting, they kind of integrated. But it was hard, you know, for them to do that because that was not the law of the land. Also, um, another thing I learned was that the African American soldiers during, say, training, when they brought over the German prisoners of war, the German prisoners of war were treated better than the African American soldiers. And so they would see the German prisoners of war go in the front door of some place, but they had to go to the back door, things like that. Um, yeah, also learned about the double V, where African Americans were encouraged to fight in the war because they thought they'd have victory if they helped with victory overseas in the war, they would have victory at home, which, and my book talks about this, which did not happen. It was the same when they came. In fact, it was worse. I mean, um, especially in the South. It was worse for the soldiers when they came back. They were disrespected and that. So I learned a lot about the war, especially.
I'm curious to know more about how that made you feel to learn those things. My writing delves into the history of settler colonialism, and I'm always shocked by the things I learn about what happened, and it's just one thing after another. You certainly are quite familiar with the history of racial segregation and discrimination in this country. Was it even like, what was it like for you to be like, what, this happened too?
It was like that. It was, I didn't realize the degree to which to which the armed forces were segregated. I didn't realize, like people like Eisenhower, and how when they were talking about integrating toward the end of the war, the fighting, the infantry, how he pushed back, how everybody pushed back and said, no, no, this is not our policy. It was, it's disheartening to see things like that, and also for the men who came back to not have opportunities to see things like the GI Bill, but it was a state it was state to state, it changed. So the state could decide who could get the loans and who couldn't. And rather than a national, it was a national program, but it was implemented state by state. So if you were in the South, of course, then you had less opportunities. But even in California, that part I didn't know. It was pretty much the same here. You didn't have the opportunities. And that's part of why I think I wrote the book about California, because people don't realize that it was the same in California as it was in other places. You think that California is at that time was very different, but it wasn't. Of course, I went to integrated schools, and my dad did too. But you still lived on one side of the track, and tracks, and the other people, the white people lived on the. So it was still, it was still like that. You just didn't know that it wasn't supposed to be as a child. That's just, you know, how it is.
I don't want to get too heavy, but I am curious to talk a little bit more about this. Um, because you wrote an essay called My Backpack, which I listened to because it was recorded on NPR. It was a really fascinating essay that must have been shortly after the murder of George Floyd,
Right.
and you mentioned in that essay that this tragedy shined a light on racism, but it was only a flashlight. And here we are, almost 5 years later. I live in Minneapolis, where George Floyd was murdered. Can you reflect a little on what has happened since then, and if that tragedy, do you feel like has moved us forward, or is it still just a dim light that on racism?
Yeah, I don't think that we have moved forward. I mean, we can see what's happening in politics now. I think that essentially what we see now is a backlash against that. What happened is that people, didn't like that light. Now it's and it's for me it's very disheartening the way that in America we're sweeping things under the rug. You don't want to see things. You don't want to look at the history. You don't want to know how we got here. You just want to pretend like it didn't happen and not tell children about the things that happened. So um, that's very, you know, uh, like I said, disheartening to see that. And I wonder, where we're going from here. But I don't think that things have really changed very much. I think that a lot of what happened was backlash, and this goes back to the Obama years. After Obama, they're like, wait a minute. That's how I look at it. Is that people were like, oh no, this is too much. In fact, we saw what happened after that, and then and now the same thing after, like you said, this is the after George Floyd, all after the demonstrations and all that, people are like, no, we want to go back. We want to go back. We don't want to look at ourselves. And there's no way that we can go forward without looking back.
Well, that makes me think about the Brown v. Board of Education and integrating schools and the pushback that happened there in Arkansas and the fact that they brought in the military to prevent this from happening. And then they just closed down the schools, said no more school because we don't want to be integrated. So yeah, it's hard to take, especially as we sit here and talk today on Inauguration Day. And I appreciate you talking about that. And hopefully, it's just half a step backward and two forward. But yeah, I completely understand what you're saying.
I hope you're right. I hope that people are more active, and don't just let things go. I know that, it's Martin Luther King Day, and so today there's um, a celebration in San Francisco, and I hope that people keep fighting, essentially. And I think we will. I think we will. There are a lot of people who are still fighting. It's just that you didn't know what a fight you had. You thought that it wasn't quite as big as it seems to be right now.
Well, let's get back to your writing. You are part of an anthology called Table of Ten, which I assume was contributions of your writers group. And I think that's really wonderful that you have this strong connection with the writers group. Can you talk about that group and how it helps you and how you help each other?
Yes, it's really great. The person who started it, Camille Minicino, she passed away just last year. And but we stayed together, the table of 10, and every week we send a we do writing, and then we critique each other's writing, and it helps you strengthen your writing. It helps you see what you could do better. And all of us are, helping and pushing and also encouraging each other to submit so that we can be published, things like that. And Camille was like that. When I first came to the table of 10, I thought I had finished Still Kicking. And Camille told me, no, you can write more about this. And I did. And so that's what I have now. So I really say that this group and Camille have helped me immensely to grow. And of course, the more you write, the better you get. And that's what I feel. In fact, I had written something else after this book, Still Kicking, and then I came back to Still Kicking, and I started revising it and improving on it, editing it. So that group helps me a lot. And in fact, I will give them a chapter that I've redone, and we, kind of compare how it's changed. So in fact, we're meeting today. We meet every Monday, and we submit. Hopefully, I didn't submit this week because I was doing editing, a lot of editing on Still Kicking, but it's the best thing that has happened to me and for my writing, because we have some wonderful, talented writers in the group.
And you guys are able to meet in person. That's rare,
No,
kind of rare these days. No.
yeah, we're still Zooming every now and then. Maybe we're trying to do once a month where we meet in person, which is a lot of fun because then you have food and you get to see it, in real life. It's great, but we're mostly it's on Zoom that we meet. Yeah.
Tell me about your publisher, Toolberg Press. I was not familiar with them. Tell me about their mission and how you ended up partnering with them.
Well, it came to me on Facebook. I saw them doing an event, and it's a wonderful group, that it's not only about publishing but also about promoting literacy in the Stockton, California area. They publish books that are set in the Central Valley of California. So that's how we got together, is my book is about Central California, and that's what they published. It's a very small press, but They've been very supportive. In fact, my editor is working with me now, Amy Smith, to help us, polish before we send it, off to the printer. Um, but they had an event in September, very, very nice, raising money really to support literacy. They have workshops for young teenagers. They go to schools and do workshops. It's not just that publishing arm, but the whole mission really is literacy for all.
You said you were going to go back more toward short stories, but it sounds like you also have another full manuscript ready, almost ready. Tell us
Yeah,
about
that's
what you're
true.
working
That's
on.
true. I'm working on a novel. Excuse me, it's centered in Oakland, California. And I take one of the characters, Isella, from uh, Still Kicking, and she moves up to Oakland. She wants to be a beautician and she wants to get a license. So she has to come out of Merced and come to the city so that yeah, well, Oakland is a city too. Usually when we say city, we're talking about San Francisco, but to Oakland. And she sees the Black community there. It's very different from the small town that she's come from. And she has some difficulty romantically. She met up with a woman who it's not quite, it's like where rich Black men go. It's like a club, and then she supplies the women that come there. It's not sexual, but it can be if they take it out, out of there. So she's in that kind of environment. It's very different from her. It's like a different pond. She was like what do you call it? A big fish in a small pond, but now she's in this big pond, and her eyes are really open to a lot of things. She sees clubs that she's never seen because she's from a small town. So it's about her essentially and her landlady. And also her landlady is the widow of a porter of from the what are they called? The porters from the train porters. It's missing, the word is missing now. But anyway, sleep like the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, where um, they started a union and things. So it's all about that. But mainly it's about the character Isella and her landlady and how they negotiate her move, and if she decides that she's going to stay in Oakland or if she's going to go back to the small town. And that's what happens to a lot of people. You probably know how you leave your little small town and you come and you think you're a big city person and you want to stay, but something's pulling you back. So, so she's having that kind of issue. That's my next book. Then I'm thinking about another one, but it's just thinking. Yeah,
Well, it sounds like you have your work cut out for you. Are the characters still coming to you as you go?
just the same. I don't. In fact, it seems if I go to the third, it would probably be a character from from one of the two that would go into the next one. I want to have a woman who is kind of a bad person. I usually have nice people that might have gone through some tough times, but I want a woman who uses a lot of profanity, who drinks and all that. So I want to explore that part that I kind of leave to the side in my next venture.
Interesting. Well, as a creator of the story, you can do that.
Yes, that's a good thing about that.
Well, Billy, it's been absolutely fascinating to talk to you. I can't wait to get my hands on Still Kicking. Congratulations.
Thank
And thank
you.
you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Colin, for having me.